The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned village of Kreshta, where Ranger Marcus Sullivan crouched behind the crumbling remains of what once was a schoolhouse. His radio crackled with static, the voices of his commanding officers growing more desperate with each transmission. 3 weeks had passed since their unit had been cut off from the main force, and ammunition was running dangerously low. Marcus wiped the sweat from his brow, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he surveyed the desolate landscape before him. The enemy had surrounded their position completely, turning what should have been a routine reconnaissance mission into a nightmare of survival. His team of 12 had been reduced to just 4 men, each one carrying wounds both visible and hidden. The village had become their fortress and their prison. Every building told a story of the civilians who had fled in terror, leaving behind personal belongings scattered like fallen leaves. Children's toys lay abandoned in the dusty streets, and family photographs peered out from shattered windows, silent witnesses to the horror that had consumed this place. Sergeant Williams crawled up beside Marcus, his left arm wrapped in a makeshift bandage that had long since turned crimson. "Sir, we've got movement on the eastern perimeter. Looks like they're setting up for another assault." His voice carried the exhaustion that had settled into all their bones, like a persistent ache. Marcus nodded grimly, knowing that their defensive position was becoming increasingly untenable. They had managed to hold off 3 major attacks in the past week, but each victory had come at a terrible cost. Their supplies were nearly gone, medical equipment was depleted, and the men were running on nothing but determination and the fading hope of rescue. The radio buzzed again, and Marcus recognized the voice of Colonel Hayes from base camp, though the signal was weak and intermittent. "Bravo, team. This is command. What's your current status?" The question hung in the air like a death sentence, because they all knew the answer. "Command, this is Bravo leader," Marcus responded, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "We're holding position, but barely. Enemy forces have us completely surrounded. We need immediate extraction or reinforcements." He paused, listening to the distant sound of approaching vehicles. "Sir, I'll be honest. We're looking at a miracle here. That's all we've got left." The silence that followed was more telling than any words could have been. Everyone knew that no reinforcements were coming. The main force was engaged in heavy fighting 50 kilometers away, and air support had been grounded due to severe weather conditions that showed no signs of clearing. Private Rodriguez, the youngest member of their team at barely 19 years old, clutched his rifle with white knuckles as he peered through a crack in the wall. His eyes held a mixture of fear and determination that reminded Marcus of his own first combat experience many years ago. "Sarge, how long do you think we can hold out?" The question was one they all wanted answered but feared to ask. Marcus looked around at his remaining men, seeing the exhaustion etched into their faces, the way they conserved every movement to preserve energy. Their last meal had been 2 days ago, consisting of half a ration pack split 4 ways. "We hold as long as we can, Rodriguez. That's what we do." Marcus tried to inject confidence into his words, though privately he wondered if they would see another sunset. The enemy had shown no mercy to captured soldiers, and surrender was not an option any of them would consider. As if summoned by his dark thoughts, the sound of gunfire erupted from the northern edge of the village. Corporal Jenkins, who had been monitoring that sector, came running toward their position with blood streaming down his face from a fresh cut above his eyebrow. "They're coming in hard from 3 sides, Jenkins shouted over the increasing noise of battle. "Heavy machine guns and what looks like armored vehicles. We've got maybe 10 minutes before they reach the center of town." Marcus felt his stomach tighten as he realized this was likely their final stand. He had led men into combat for over 15 years, had survived conflicts in 3 different countries, but he had never faced odds this overwhelming with so few resources. The sound of mortar shells whistling through the air sent them all diving for cover as explosions rocked the building around them. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling, and Marcus could taste the bitter powder of pulverized concrete on his tongue. "Sir, we need to fall back to the church," Williams suggested, pointing toward the stone building at the center of the village. "It's got better sight lines and thicker walls." Marcus nodded, knowing it was their only option. The church had become their final defensive position, a place where they could make their last stand with some dignity. As they gathered their remaining equipment and prepared to move, he couldn't help but think about the families back home who would soon receive devastating news. The dash across the open square felt like running through hell itself. Enemy fire kicked up dirt clouds around their feet, and the sharp crack of bullets passing close overhead made them zigzag desperately toward the sanctuary of the old stone church. Once inside, they quickly established firing positions at the windows, though Marcus knew it was more symbolic than strategic at this point. Their ammunition count was so low that each bullet had to be considered carefully, saved for moments when it might actually make a difference. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded him painfully of home, Marcus allowed himself a moment of reflection. He thought about his wife Sarah, probably just finishing dinner, and wondering why his last letter had sounded so final. He thought about his daughter Emma, who would graduate from college next month without her father in the audience. The enemy forces had grown quiet, which somehow felt more ominous than the constant gunfire. They were likely regrouping for a final, overwhelming assault, one that would finish this siege once and for all. "Listen up, men," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly in the stone chamber of the church. "I won't lie to you about our situation, but I will say this. We've fought with honor, we've held our ground, and we've made them pay for every inch." Williams managed a weak smile despite their circumstances. "Hell of a run, sir." Rodriguez crossed himself and whispered a prayer in Spanish, his young face somehow appearing both terrified and peaceful. Jenkins simply checked his weapon one more time, the practiced motions of a soldier who had accepted his fate. As darkness settled over the village like a shroud, Marcus positioned himself at the main window facing the square. The silence was broken only by the distant sound of engines and the occasional bark of orders in a foreign language. They were coming, and everyone knew it. Marcus keyed his radio one last time, hoping against hope that somehow, somewhere, someone was listening who might be able to help them. The static seemed louder than usual, but through it came the familiar voice of command, though it sounded strangely distant and unclear. "Command, this is Bravo Leader. If anyone is monitoring this frequency, we are making our final stand at the church in Cresta village. Enemy forces are preparing for final assault. Tell our families." His voice caught slightly. "Tell them we did our duty." The radio went silent, leaving them alone with their thoughts and the approaching sounds of war. Marcus checked his ammunition one final time, counted the remaining clips, and settled in to wait for whatever fate had in store for them. In the distance, a single light appeared, growing larger as it approached the village. Whether it brought salvation or destruction, only time would tell. The mysterious light that Marcus had spotted in the distance proved to be something entirely unexpected. As it drew closer to the village, the sound of a single motorcycle engine cut through the night air, growing louder with each passing second. The enemy forces seemed as confused as the trapped rangers, their searchlights frantically sweeping the darkness to identify this new arrival. Elena Vasquez had been tracking the situation in Cresta for 3 days, moving through the mountainous terrain with the stealth and precision that had made her legendary among resistance fighters. At 32, she had spent the last 8 years of her life perfecting the art of warfare from the shadows. And tonight, she intended to use every skill she had learned. The motorcycle skidded to a halt behind a cluster of abandoned houses on the village's edge, hidden from the main enemy positions but close enough for Elena to assess the tactical situation. Through her night vision scope, she could see the full extent of the siege that had trapped the American Rangers. Elena counted at least 40 enemy soldiers positioned in a rough circle around the church, with heavy machine gun nests at 3 key points, and what appeared to be a mortar team setting up for a final bombardment. The odds were impossible, but she had faced impossible odds before. Her reputation in the region was whispered about in both fear and admiration. The enemy knew her only as the Ghost, a sniper who seemed to appear from nowhere, strike with deadly precision, and vanish before anyone could locate her position. Local resistance groups spoke of her with reverence, crediting her with single-handedly disrupting supply convoys and eliminating high-value targets across 3 provinces. What most people didn't know was that Elena had once been trapped in a similar situation herself. 2 years earlier, she had watched her entire unit wiped out while she hid helplessly in a collapsed building, unable to help as her friends and fellow fighters were systematically hunted down. The guilt and rage from that night had forged her into the weapon she had become. Moving with practiced silence, Elena began to work her way through the ruins toward an elevated position that would give her clear sightlines to the enemy positions. Her custom rifle, a modified precision instrument that she had spent months perfecting, felt comfortable and familiar in her hands. Inside the church, Marcus and his men had heard the motorcycle but couldn't determine whether it represented friend or foe. The uncertainty added another layer of tension to an already impossible situation. Williams kept watch at the eastern window while Rodriguez monitored the radio for any sign of communication. "Sir, something's happening out there," Jenkins whispered urgently from his position at the north window. "The enemy positions are getting restless. Lot of movement and radio chatter." Marcus moved to observe, noting that the besieging forces seemed to be repositioning themselves in response to the unknown arrival. This created a small window of opportunity, though he wasn't sure how to exploit it with their limited resources. Elena had reached her chosen position in the bell tower of a partially collapsed building overlooking the square. The elevation gave her perfect sightlines to all three machine gun positions, and more importantly, she could see the command post where enemy officers were coordinating the final assault. She settled into her shooting position with the patience that had kept her alive through countless engagements. Through her scope, she identified the enemy commander, a tall man with distinctive insignia, who was obviously directing the operation. Taking him out would create confusion and buy the trapped Rangers precious time. The first shot came without warning, the suppressed rifle producing only a soft whisper as the enemy commander dropped instantly. The chaos that followed was immediate, and exactly what Elena had hoped for. Soldiers scrambled for cover, unsure where the threat was coming from, while officers tried desperately to maintain order. Marcus heard the distant shot and saw the sudden commotion in the enemy ranks. "Someone's out there," he told his men, feeling the first spark of hope he had experienced in days. "And they're on our side." Elena had already moved to a different position, a lesson learned from hard experience. The second shot eliminated the spotter for the eastern machine gun nest, creating a blind spot in their defensive perimeter. The third shot took out the gunner himself, silencing one of the three heavy weapons that had them pinned down. The enemy forces were now in complete disarray, spinning in circles as they tried to locate the source of the precise, deadly fire that was systematically dismantling their siege. Radio chatter filled the air as squad leaders demanded orders from commanders who were no longer alive to give them. Recognizing the opportunity, Marcus signaled his men to prepare for action. "This is our chance. Williams, take Rodriguez and move to the south entrance. Jenkins, you're with me on the north side. When I give the signal, we hit the remaining machine gun positions." Elena continued her methodical work, each shot carefully calculated for maximum tactical impact. She targeted communications equipment, disabled vehicles, and eliminated key personnel with the cold efficiency of a professional. The enemy force, which had seemed so overwhelming just minutes before, was rapidly becoming a confused mob. The psychological impact of her intervention was perhaps even more important than the tactical one. The besieging soldiers had spent weeks feeling invincible, slowly tightening the noose around their trapped prey. Now they found themselves being hunted by an invisible predator who seemed to strike from everywhere and nowhere. Marcus saw his moment when the Western machine gun crew abandoned their position to search for the sniper. "Now!" he shouted, leading Jenkins in a desperate charge across the square. Their remaining ammunition had to count, and they used it with the precision that comes from fighting for survival. The coordinated attack from inside the church and the continued sniper fire from Elena's position created a devastating combination. The enemy force, caught between multiple threats and lacking clear leadership, began to break apart as individual soldiers sought cover or attempted to retreat. Williams and Rodriguez succeeded in capturing the abandoned machine gun position, turning the weapon against its former owners. The heavy gun's deep chatter filled the night air as they swept the enemy positions, forcing the remaining soldiers to withdraw to more distant cover. Elena had moved 3 more times during the battle, always staying one step ahead of the enemy attempts to locate her. From her current position on a rooftop across the square, she could see that the immediate threat to the church had been neutralized, but she knew this was only a temporary victory. Through her radio, which was tuned to multiple frequencies, She could hear the enemy calling for reinforcements. A larger force was already en route, expected to arrive before dawn. The rescued Rangers would need to evacuate immediately if they wanted to avoid facing an even worse situation than before. Using a captured enemy radio, Elena managed to establish communication with the church. Her voice, speaking accented but clear English, crackled through the speaker that Williams had been monitoring. "American soldiers, this is your guardian angel. You have maybe 2 hours before reinforcements arrive. We need to get you out of here now." Marcus grabbed the radio, hardly believing what he was hearing. "This is Bravo, leader." "Who is this? How many are you?" "Just me," Elena replied simply. "And right now, I'm all the cavalry you're going to get." The revelation that a single person had single-handedly broken a siege that had seemed hopeless sent a wave of amazement through the trapped Rangers. They had witnessed something that would become the stuff of military legend. Though, at the moment, they were more concerned with staying alive long enough to tell the story. "What's the extraction plan?" Marcus asked, his training taking over despite his astonishment. "There's a dried riverbed about 2 kilometers north of here. It leads to an old mining road that connects with the main highway. If we can reach it before reinforcements arrive, you might have a chance to link up with friendly forces." Elena was already planning their route, mentally mapping the terrain and identifying potential obstacles. The wounded would slow them down. But she had dealt with similar challenges before. The key was to keep moving and avoid getting pinned down again. "Roger that. Give us 10 minutes to gather our gear and we'll be ready to move." As Marcus prepared his men for what might be their only chance at survival, he couldn't help but wonder about the mysterious woman who had appeared from nowhere to save them. In all his years of military service, he had never experienced anything quite like this night. Elena remained vigilant at her overwatch position, knowing that their escape was far from guaranteed. The real test would come in the next few hours, as they attempted to navigate through enemy-controlled territory with wounded men and limited supplies. But for the first time in weeks, the impossible suddenly seemed merely difficult. The escape from Kreshta village proved to be every bit as challenging as Elena had anticipated. Leading 4 wounded soldiers through hostile territory in darkness required all the skills she had developed during years of guerrilla warfare. Marcus and his men moved as quietly as they could manage, but their injuries and exhaustion made stealth nearly impossible. Elena scouted ahead, using hand signals to guide them around enemy patrols and through the safest routes she could identify. Her knowledge of the local terrain was invaluable, as she led them through hidden paths and forgotten trails that didn't appear on any military map. The dried riverbed provided excellent concealment for the first kilometer of their journey. But Williams was struggling badly with his wounded arm, and Rodriguez was showing signs of severe dehydration. Elena called for a brief rest in a cluster of large rocks that offered both cover and defensive positions. "We need to pick up the pace," she whispered to Marcus during the halt. "I'm hearing radio chatter about search teams being deployed along all the main routes. They know we escaped, and they're mobilizing everything they have to find us." Marcus nodded grimly, understanding the implications. His men were already pushing beyond their physical limits, but stopping meant death for all of them. How much further to the main road? Another 8 kilometers, but the last 3 are the most dangerous. We'll be crossing open ground with minimal cover. Elena checked her watch, noting that dawn was less than 2 hours away. Once the sun came up, their chances of remaining undetected would drop to almost 0. The sound of helicopters in the distance confirmed their worst fears. The enemy was bringing in air assets to coordinate the search, which would make their escape exponentially more difficult. Elena knew they had to reach the mining road before the aircraft could establish an effective search pattern. "Sir, I don't think I can make it much further," Rodriguez admitted, his voice barely audible. The young soldier was clearly at the end of his endurance, though he was still trying to keep up with the group. Without hesitation, Elena moved to Rodriguez's side and began redistributing the weight of his gear among the other team members. "You're going to make it," she told him firmly. "We don't leave people behind." Jenkins, despite his own injuries, took point with Elena as they resumed their movement through increasingly treacherous terrain. The mining road was still several kilometers away, but they could already hear the sound of vehicles moving along it in both directions. Whether those vehicles contained friends or enemies remained to be determined. Elena's radio crackled with intercepted enemy communications, and the news was not encouraging. Multiple search teams were converging on their general area, and roadblocks were being established at all major intersections. The window for escape was closing rapidly. "Change of plans," Elena announced after reviewing the tactical situation. "The main road is compromised. There's an abandoned mining facility about 4 kilometers to the east. It's got underground tunnels that connect to a different road network." Marcus trusted her judgment completely at this point, having witnessed her remarkable tactical abilities firsthand. "Lead the way. We'll follow your plan." The detour added significant distance to their journey, but Elena's alternative route proved to be inspired. The abandoned mine provided not only concealment, but also an underground passage that allowed them to bypass several enemy checkpoints entirely. Moving through the old mining tunnels was slow and nerve-wracking work. With only flashlights to illuminate the crumbling passages, the air was stale and dusty, and the constant fear of cave-ins added another layer of stress to an already desperate situation. Elena had explored these tunnels months earlier while conducting reconnaissance in the area, and her familiarity with the layout proved crucial. She led them through a maze of passages that eventually emerged near an old mining equipment depot several kilometers from their starting point. As they surfaced from the underground route, the first light of dawn was beginning to appear on the horizon. Elena immediately established a defensive perimeter while she assessed their new position and planned the final phase of their escape. Through her binoculars, she could see the secondary road that would lead them to safety. But it was guarded by at least one enemy checkpoint. The guards appeared relaxed, not expecting anyone to approach from this direction, which gave Elena an idea for how to deal with them. "I need 20 minutes to clear that checkpoint," she told Marcus. "Once you hear my signal, move fast across the road and into the tree line on the far side. There's a communications relay station about 2 kilometers beyond that where you should be able to establish contact with your forces." Marcus wanted to object to her going alone into obvious danger, but he recognized that splitting up was their best chance for success. "What's your extraction plan? We can't just leave you behind after everything you've done." Elena smiled, the first time any of them had seen her expression soften. "Don't worry about me. I know this country better than anyone, and I've got my own ways of disappearing when necessary." The attack on the checkpoint was swift and decisive, demonstrating once again Elena's remarkable tactical skills. She approached from an unexpected angle, neutralized the guards with precision fire, and then created a diversion that drew any remaining enemy forces away from the crossing point. Marcus led his men across the road during the chaos, reaching the safety of the forest just as Elena's predetermined signal echoed across the valley. They were finally in friendly territory, though still several kilometers from guaranteed safety. The communications relay station proved to be exactly where Elena had indicated, and Marcus was able to establish contact with his command structure for the first time in over 3 weeks. The relief in the voices of his superiors was evident even through the static-filled radio connection. "Bravo, leader. This is command. Confirm your position and status. We have extraction assets standing by." Unquote. "We have extraction assets standing by." As Marcus provided their coordinates and requested immediate evacuation for his wounded men, he kept scanning the tree line for any sign of Elena. She had promised to follow them to the relay station, but so far there was no indication of her presence. Rodriguez was the first to spot her, emerging from the forest like a ghost materializing from the morning mist. She had shed most of her combat gear and now looked more like a local civilian than the deadly sniper who had saved their lives. "Your ride should be here within the hour," she announced, having monitored their radio communication from a distance. "Medical evacuation helicopter is en route, along with a security escort." Williams struggled to his feet despite his injuries, extending his good hand toward Elena. "Ma'am, I don't know how we can ever thank you for what you've done. You saved all our lives." Elena shook his hand, then moved to check on Rodriguez and Jenkins, her expression showing genuine concern for their condition. "You would have done the same thing if the situation was reversed. That's what soldiers do." The sound of approaching helicopters filled the air, and Marcus felt a wave of emotion that he struggled to control. After weeks of believing they would never see home again, Salvation was literally descending from the sky. "Come with us," Marcus offered, as the rescue aircraft came into view. "We can arrange transportation back to the States, proper medical care, whatever you need." Elena shook her head gently, already beginning to fade back toward the tree line. "This is my home, my war. But thank you for the offer." As the helicopters landed and medics rushed to attend to the wounded rangers, Elena melted back into the forest as mysteriously as she had appeared. By the time Marcus had briefed the rescue team commanders and ensured his men were receiving proper medical attention, she was nowhere to be seen. The official reports would credit their escape to Allied resistance fighters and favorable tactical circumstances. But Marcus and his men knew the truth. They had witnessed something extraordinary. A demonstration of courage and skill that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Weeks later, as Marcus recovered in a military hospital and prepared for his return home, he tried repeatedly to contact Elena through various military and intelligence channels. Every inquiry hit dead ends, as if the woman who had saved them had never existed at all. Rodriguez, fully recovered from his ordeal, often spoke of their mysterious rescuer with something approaching reverence. "She was like an angel, sir, appeared when we needed her most, did what needed to be done, and then vanished." Williams would eventually write a detailed account of their experience, though many readers would dismiss it as exaggerated war stories. Those who knew Williams personally, however, understood that he was not given to embellishment or fantasy. Jenkins carried a small piece of equipment that Elena had given him during their escape, a compass that had belonged to her fallen unit members. He considered it his most precious possession, a tangible reminder of the night when one person's courage had made all the difference. The war eventually ended, as all wars do, but the legend of the ghost continued to grow in the region. Local people spoke of a guardian angel who protected those who fought for justice, though her true identity remained a mystery that no one seemed able to solve. Marcus returned to his family and eventually retired from active duty, but he never forgot the lesson Elena had taught him about the power of one determined individual to change the course of events. In his darker moments, when the world seemed overwhelming and hopeless, he would remember her words. That's what soldiers do. Sometimes, late at night when he couldn't sleep, Marcus would wonder if Elena was still out there somewhere, still fighting her solitary war against impossible odds. He hoped she was safe, wherever she was, and that she knew how much her actions had meant to 4 soldiers who had lost all hope. The miracle she had provided would remain with them forever. A reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, help can come from the most unexpected sources. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to step into the darkness and light a candle for others to follow.